Hey everyone, and welcome to Fandom Must Reads in 2025. My name is Alex Zalben. I'm one of the hosts and producer for Comic Book Club, a live weekly podcast all about comic books, and I'll be your moderator for this panel. Just broadly speaking, fandom itself is a pretty broad topic that can include almost anything. Comic books, TV shows, movies, books, of course. Basically, if you enjoy something and are passionate about it, you're a fan. You're part of a fandom. You can be new to it, you can be old to it, doesn't matter. You're in the fandom. And I'm incredibly excited that we have three of the best fandom writers in the business on this panel today to talk about three graphic novels coming up in 2025 that you're going to absolutely love. So, without further ado, let's welcome in our panelists for today. Come on in, guys. Water's hot. Cool? I don't know. One of the expressions. Welcome, everybody. Excited to have you on here. Right at the top of my screen, don't know how it says showing up to everybody at home, we have Faith Erin Hicks. She is the writer of Avatar, The Last Airbender, Ashes of the Academy from Dark Horse Comics, which hits stores on March 25th, 2025. This is the seventh graphic novel Faith has written following up the events of the beloved Nickelodeon animated series, and this time the action turns to a new school in the Fire Nation. Faith, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Excited to have you here. Next down in my list of heads that I'm looking at is Stephanie Phillips. She has written books focusing on characters ranging from Black Widow to Harley Quinn and everybody in between. And she's here to talk about Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider, Volume 1 Haunted from Marvel Comics, which hits stores on January 21st, 2025. This collects the first 5 issues of the currently ongoing series, which finds the title character stranded in the regular Marvel Comics universe for mysterious reasons. Stephanie, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, and last and definitely not least, we have Dan Waters, who is no stranger to Gotham City thanks to his work on Detective Comics and Batman Dark Patterns. But now he's turned to Batman's former sidekick with Nightwing Volume 1 from DC Comics, which hits stores on July 1st, 2025, and finds Dick Grayson facing new threats in the city of Bloodhaven. Dan, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me.
Excited to talk to all of you, and I do want to delve into this books, and we're going to talk more specifically. But per the idea of the panel, I wanted to start with the broadest question possible. What do you think makes somebody a fan? And I touched on it a little bit in the intro, but when someone says they're part of a fandom, what does that mean to you? And Faith, I'll just go to you first, just because you're at the top. But Stephanie, Dan, feel free to jump in.
I'm just going to define what I think of when I think about the things that I'm a fan of. I'm a really big fan of the video game series Dragon Age. I'm currently obsessed with it right now because there's a new game out, and I'm in the midst of playing it. And for me, it really means like engaging with that particular media. I love doing fan art. I enjoy reading fan fiction. I enjoy immersing myself in this world, this incredible artistic world that amazing creators have made. And I love talking about it with my friends in a very, very geeky way. I actually have a group of friends in real life here in Vancouver that are all Dragon Age fans, and we get together on the regular just to talk about Dragon Age, which is, I don't know, it's like community, creative expression. It's all of those things. I'm very, very nerdy about the things that I love. So that is how I define it. I know there are many, many different definitions.
Stephanie, do you have a alternate take, rebuttal, I guess? I'm kidding.
No. No, I like that it's anything you want to engage with or be a fan of. I guess I would prefer not to define it because I think being in a realm where you like something and you tell people and sometimes it gets thrown back like, oh, you don't know enough or you haven't seen or read enough or something like that. And it's like, if you want to be a fan of it, you're a fan of it. If you've seen one Harry Potter movie, you can be I don't care. That's great. I'm excited that you like something, and I love when people love something. And that to me is the most exciting, when people want to talk about something they're into. And I don't think there should be any metric for what makes you a fan of that. As long as you want to say you're a fan of it, I'm cool with that. That's exciting.
Yeah. And Dan, what about you? What's your take on it?
Hard agree with what Steph just said. particularly coming sort of out of having grown up in sort of metal scenes and punk scenes and stuff. There's so much people love to be sort of elitist and stuff. And if you don't know the right bands, or you're still listening to the band from 2 years ago, you're not a proper fan. And what a load of nonsense that is. But I think in fiction as well, there's an interesting thing. I kind of think of fandom as the second life that the thing tends to take on outside of the sort of official capacity, the creative capacity. There's all of these sort of um, you end up with all these sort of in jokes and these throwbacks and stuff that are just passed around by fans, particularly online and the conventions and things. These things that they grow to love about the character that isn't even necessarily in the original sort of stories, the original text, and then it ends up coming back into them. So it's part of so it keeps the thing alive.
Well, let's talk specifically about the fandoms that you're involved in here, because, like we said up at the beginning, these are three very different worlds. We have the world of Avatar from Dark Horse, we have the world of the Marvel Universe, the DC Universe. Very excited to talk about all these together, but to go in reverse order. Dan, when did you find yourself first interested in the DC Universe? What first grabbed you about that?
Oh, I think like for most of my generation, it was Batman the animated series, and I was uh, smaller than I can actually remember. I don't really remember a time before it. Um, but having sort of VHSs of that as a kid and seeing it on TV and being absolutely sort of addicted to that. And then I was in the UK. It was harder to get hold of DC comics if you were a wee nipper, um, and you didn't know about specialist comic stores or not or anything like that. So once I had discovered that stuff and I realized there was a whole world of that and all the Elseworld stuff and all these different versions of these characters, I just became a voracious reader.
Hmm. Stephanie, when did you get into the Marvel Universe? What first drew you?
The arcade game where you could like pick your character and like play against somebody and you just like sit there and button mash, or at least I did, because that's how I would beat my brother, just like hold your hand on all of them. I would play as Gambit because I liked that he had a stick, so I didn't know anything about the characters. I was just like, I can play Gambit the best, and that was kind of my entry point into the Marvel universe. And which later turned into animated show, which was fantastic. I like the new one as well, and comics, and I like that I've now gotten to write Gambit and make him hit things with a stick in the comic book. So it's come full
I
circle.
I used to play the Sentinel, which I don't know what that says about me. We won't delve into that. This panel is not about me. Faith, what about you? What first drew you to Avatar? I have to imagine it was the animated series, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right. It was the animated series. My background is actually in animation. I went to college for animation. My husband is an animator, so I'm still very much immersed in the world of animation. And Avatar premiered in the mid-aughts, and I was actually newly graduated from animation college, working in animation, hating my job, just, felt creatively very, very low at that time. I was not doing the kind of work that I wanted to do. And also the animation, the kind of stories that were being told in animation in the aughts in particular were not what Avatar was. It was like, they're not serialized stories. They were not, stories about characters going on a journey, that kind of thing. They didn't have a lot of ambition. And then Avatar kind of came out of nowhere, and it was just like, blew my mind. I was just like, this is what North American animation can be. This is incredible. This is amazing. So was really, really into the show for quite a while, and engaged with the fandom in a very limited way, and drew fan art and drew comics about my love of the show, and then ended up meeting up with and engaging with the show's creators through that, and then wrote and drew my own creator-owned fantasy trilogy called The Nameless City that is kind of has a similar vibe as Avatar. It was very much inspired by Avatar. So based on that experience, I was able to get this job writing Avatar comics, and they're drawn by my amazing collaborators, Peter Wortman and Adele Matera. But yeah, it was definitely the show. It was like seeing the ambition of the show, the writing, the character development. That was something that really drew me in, and also I really aspired to as a creator. So yeah, 100% the show, and then just like the life that it took on after it actually went off the air. You know, Korra came after it, and then the comics that Gene Yang and Guri Huru did that came before my particular stint on this project.
Let's get into the books in particular then, now that we've established your fandom creds, I guess. I gave the broadest of overviews right at the top, not to switch you into salesman mode, but I'd just love to hear you guys give sort of the elevator pitch for this volume in particular. What's cool or different about your book, and why people should be reading it, why they should be picking it up. Stephanie, just to change it up, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, this is a new entry point for Gwen readers. It's a really good jumping on point. It is taking her out of her universe and establishing a new status quo for her on the main Marvel Earth, Earth 616, and kind of giving her a bit of a mystery. So she's not sure, or the reader isn't sure why she's there. She's hiding it from the reader as well as the other spiders of Earth 616. So she's keeping secrets, and now she's dealing with a classic Spider-Man villain that has decided to target her as a newcomer to Earth 616. So it's really our kicking off point for the series. It starts off the big mystery that we're currently unraveling, like in issue 11. So it's kind of a long form mystery, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. But,
Dan, what about you? You want to tell us about Nightwing, Volume 1?
Yeah, so it's the first volume as part of the DC All In initiative, which is all jumping on points. So it's very much a fresh start, but we're also very aware that we're standing on the shoulders of giants in that we've just taken over from Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo, who had a sort of massively award-winning apocalyptic run, and so we're very much aware that we are continuing the story that they were telling, but taking it in a whole new different direction. So the things that people have loved about the book should still be there, but it's definitely a different tone. It's definitely a darker book than they were telling. And what I'm excited about it is it's with everything that's been done with the character in the DC universe over the last few years, we're now able to sort of tell stories about him where we're not having to justify his existence in relation to Batman. This is a Nightwing story. We're never having to worry about that shadow being cast over it. It's him, his city, and his way of dealing with things, which is different from how Batman deals with things.
Yeah. And Faith, what about you? What can we expect from Ashes of the Academy?
So yeah, as you mentioned, this is the 7th book in the series that Peter, Adele, and I have been doing. I've got some of the books right here. So many of them. So Ashes of the Academy takes place after the events of the show. It's focused on May, Zuko, the very angsty Fire Lord Prince, who is the main antagonist throughout the course of the original show. May is his ex-girlfriend, and it's basically like her life after the show, what she ends up doing with her life after the show, because so many of her friends and her companions throughout the course of the show have gone off and found their place in the world, found what they're meant to do after this, the events of the conclusion of the 100-Year War. So yeah, it's about her basically going back to the Royal Fire Academy for Girls, which is this very, pretty toxic learning environment for young Fire Nation students, all young women. And May is given the opportunity to change this institution from the inside to hopefully give students, Fire Nation students, a new way of looking at the world without constantly thinking about battle and conquest and, subjugating their rivals and their enemies and that kind of thing. So it also co-stars Kai, who is Zuko's younger half sister. So it's developing threads that Peter and I have developed over the course of the books we've done together, and then also developing story threads that were originally started by Gene Yang and Guri Huru. So hopefully you would enjoy it even if you came in completely blind, but I would recommend watching the show ahead of time so you know who these characters are. And yeah, longtime fans, I hope will enjoy it and enjoy, I don't know. Peter and I have worked really hard on these books, and it's been an absolute pleasure to play in this sandbox.
It's that dovetails nicely into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is there's sort of this tried and true maxim that I'm bangling here about every book in a series is somebody's first.
Mm.
All three of you, having read these, do provide, like Dan was saying, really good jumping on points, but they're also in the middle of ongoing stories that are sometimes decades long by this point. So this is obviously the challenge of the comic book industry in general, but how do you tackle that as a writer? How do you make sure that it works as somebody's first book or first volume in this case, while still servicing those readers who have been reading all along? Stephanie, you have any take on that? I'm just going to you because you're the one person who's unmuted.
um, yeah, I mean it's a balancing act. It's I think I service wanting to bring in new readers, wanting to get people, and also with Gwen, I think there's a big needing to be understanding that a lot of people might be coming to it from the Spider-Verse animated movies, which I wanted to also be really conscientious of. So I'm kind of pulling a lot of Gwen lore from a lot of pre-existing Gwen places, but I'm trying to also explain it. So having Gwen as a narrator where she's kind of talking about her life to the reader, and if something comes up about her father or something from the past that isn't directly in the book, she gets to be the one to kind of explain that to the reader. And I also tried to make it not super reliant on how multiverses work, because I think that can kind of like bog down the story. And so having Gwen get to kind of poke fun at that, it's like using her voice to kind of be the go-between for readers, whether they are new readers or established Gwen readers. It's been a really fun writing challenge, I guess. So, and she's lighthearted and funny. So again, letting her make fun of the multiverse and kind of make fun of some of her past missions, but also be really angsty about where she's at, having left her life, her father, given up a lot of things for something we don't know yet. But it's a huge change for her. So hearing all of that filtered through her perspective is really been my approach to it.
Dan, what about you? Like you said, for people who don't know, this is picking up on DC's All In initiative, which is very specifically across the entire line, supposed to be new jumping on points, new starts for readers. I will fully cop to my son has been going to the comic book shop, not reading DC comics. He's like, well, I'm all in on this. I'm going to start reading literally every title, which costs a lot of money, mind you. But just rather than blathering about my son too much, how do you provide that? How do you provide that in the middle of an ongoing series? Because we're picking up with issue 119, I want to say.
So yeah, I was very conscious of that. You know, it wasn't a new number one, but it's also DC All In, so it has to be a new jumping on point. But honestly, I mean, this is Dick Grayson, this is Robin, the original Robin. No one has read all of those stories. There's 85 years of them. 85 years of actual publishing time. This character has been around having adventures. Um, my thing is that the stakes in the story always have to matter within the story. I mean, I think once you have that, everything should sort of be okay, as long as we understand why someone showing up is going to cause trouble. You know, if it's the Penguin showing up, we don't need to know what 85 years of history between Robin and the Penguin look like. We just need to know that this man is trying to shoot him with an umbrella, and that's kind of more important information in the moment. So that's my general approach to that sort of thing is as long as the story in front of you is exciting, that's the most important thing, and making that all fit with the continuity and sort of stuff. That's our job. That's for us to worry about.
Yeah. And Faith, you touched on this already, but what about you? How do you make sure, let's say somebody does randomly say, oh, Ashes of the Academy, I'm a big fan of the Fire Nation. How do you make sure this is a good entry point?
I mean, I feel a little luckier than Stephanie and Dan in that Avatar doesn't have as much backstory as, all of DC Comics and Marvel. It's like there isn't 85 years of Avatar. There's the TV show, and then there's Korra. So I do pretty much always operate under the assumption that readers have watched the TV show. There was one book that Peter and I did called Imbalance that is, this one's quite a bit longer than the standalone graphic novels. Imbalance is a direct sequel to not only the show, but Gene Yang and Gray Haru's Avatar comics. So with that, I wasn't really thinking about it as a first entry point. I did operate under the assumption that the readers would come in with prior knowledge. I don't know. I've not had any complaints about that. So I am working a little bit differently than I think you guys are. But yeah, I just generally operate under the assumption that the knowledge that readers have is they know the show. So they know the characters there, and I try and go from there. But I don't spend a lot of time explaining the world or explaining the characters and their relationship, because I don't know, I always operate under the assumption that the readers have a baseline knowledge of this thing, because there is so much less of it, because I do assume that people come to these books because they're a fan of this particular franchise, which exists in such a smaller space than DC and Marvel comics. And yeah, that's worked so far. I feel like my knowledge of the lore is maybe not as deep as some of the fans. You know, sometimes I get emails and people are like, "This tiny little thing, you did it wrong," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." You know, like that wasn't some. And like these comics go through multiple layers of. You know, at Nickelodeon, the show creators look at them as well, and it's like, well, you know, it's great that you have this tiny knowledge, but neither Nickelodeon nor Brian and Mike tagged this, so maybe it's not as important as you think. I don't know. We'll see.
I saw Dad laughing. I feel like you probably deal with similar things over at DC Comics sometimes in terms of fans maybe nitpicking just a little bit, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, Steph might have it harder on the Marvel universe because that's, you know, that continuity has just run and run and run. Whereas DC, you've got the reboots and things. You've got a little bit of give, a little bit of leeway. You can kind of treat continuity as a little bit more flexible. The way I tend to think of continuity in terms of particularly the DC universe, but in superhero universes in general, is it's more like if you go back and look at an old comic, that's more like going back and looking at someone's memory of an event. It's probably a little bit off, but something like that probably happened.
Hmm. Stephanie, what's your experience with it? Just because Dad teed you up with that.
I like the description of it being like memory. That's I will adopt that and attribute it to you, Dan. That's very good. Yeah, I mean, they're super passionate readers. And it's awesome. Like the fact that they're that engaged and loving of these characters. I just think as a writer, sometimes I have to have my own boundaries with that for like a number of different reasons. But I mean, it's hard to write the story while also reading hundreds of comments, whether critical or even ones that are loving or want to add something or think they're being very supportive of it, which is always appreciated. It's not a problem. It's just very difficult to be within the space of writing those characters while also engaging with all of that. So I think it's there's a lot of balancing that's involved in this job, and that's maybe something else to just kind of balance. And in a lot of cases, I honestly just have to kind of have a wall up to that because it's like I need the blinders on to do my job. Like Faith said, you know, we have a lot of other people, and there's editorial, different levels of editorial. There's other people at Marvel that are like the lore masters of all continuity, which is really helpful as well. So there's a lot of people on the books that are kind of helping with that. And at the end of the day, I think I would prefer to give you the best story I can. And if something is slightly off in continuity, maybe Jean's memory of these events was just not as amazing as it was 10 years ago or something. So, but my goal is to give the best story I can and really service the characters as best I can. And I'm maybe not the biggest continuity junkie out there. So.
Well,
and then
that's
if
a good point.
there's
Oh,
oh yeah,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, and if there's some part of the story that the fans really want to see expanded, or you know they have their opinions about how something should go, it's like that's what fan fiction is for, and that's why it's wonderful.
Yeah. I did want to get into some specifics about the book, and this pivots off something you said earlier, Stephanie. There's some great touch points right at the beginning here. If you don't know anything about the comics, but you are a fan of the movies and the TV shows, you mentioned there's Spider-Verse elements. We get to see Miles and Peter and Silk as well. But you also, without getting too much into spoilers, we also get a setup of Obi from the TVA who showed up in the Loki TV show. Talk a little bit about incorporating those. Why were those important in terms of the kickoff of the book?
Yeah, so the TVA plays a continuously important role like throughout the series. Gwen is under like witness protection, I guess is what we'll call it, for with the TVA at the start of the series. So they've helped her relocate to Earth 616 under the kind of what we're saying is like something big and major happened on Gwen's Earth. She needed help from the TVA, protection from them to be relocated. So we're kind of dubbing it like their own witness protection program, which is fun. And I wanted to give her like a handler, somebody she was working directly with from the TVA. And when that show came out with the love for OB, we kind of all thought like it'd be really cool for OB to really make his true comic debut. So it's I don't know that that's happened to me ever before, that I've gotten to take a character from a TV show and put them in the comic, and instead of like something going vice versa. So I believe it's OB's first comic debut, which is super cool, Ouroboros. And I thought he was really the perfect person, like watching his portrayal in the TV show, perfect person to kind of foil with Gwen. Like he's very data driven. He's not interested in Gwen like crying about losing her family, or not that he's not. He has empathy, but he's like, I'm trying to do my job, and now you're crying, and like, or you know, Gwen talking about a boy problem or anything like that. I think it's just a really funny dynamic between the two of them that it sets up. So, yeah, getting to bring in the TVA was fun. Still having some elements of the larger multiverse in the Marvel universe, and where that kind of plays out over the next few arcs as well is really cool. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up Obi. He became one of my favorite characters. Like writing him is so fun. And I think one of my favorite panels, it might be in issue 1, is just like when Gwen is kind of panicking and getting freaked out and she doesn't like having to hide and not share everything with the other spiders, and Obi doesn't know how to show sympathy, and he just like pats her on the head, and there's just a little sound effect that just says like pat pat, and it's like he doesn't entirely know how to handle the large emotions that Gwen is giving. So
Dan, in terms of Nightwing, one of the things that I've really been enjoying about this run, beyond your take on Nightwing, the title character, is there's a gap in the underworld of Bloodhaven, and into it enter these 4 gangs that are so distinct and so much fun. I'd love to hear you just talk about the inspiration behind them, but I will say the Teddies are probably my favorite so far.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we get into the first arc, the volume we're talking about is quite a focus on the teddies. Yeah, partly it was sort of saying yes and to the run before us, because he looked at, okay, there was some sweeping changes made to Bloodhaven, and one of them was that a lot of the corruption that was sort of intrinsic to the city had been stripped away, like the Blockbuster gang were defeated, and the all their links to the cops were kind of discovered, so all that corruption was rooted out and sort of thing. Um, so I figured that leaves a big space, leaves a gap in the city, for other people to try and move in and start trying to cause tension and chaos, and well, really just try and make money. But I also wanted to. There's a gravitational pull to Batman and Gotham, and Bloodhaven's just across the river. So uh, things that should be Bloodhaven centric have a tendency to get swept into Gotham. Like the question a lot of people ask me when taking over the book is, oh, are you going to try and create some iconic villains for Nightwing? It's like, well, people have done it before, but they tend to end up as Batman villains, or you think of them as Batman villains because they end up over there. Professor Pig was a big one. I think he was in the Gotham TV show and everything, but he was a Nightwing villain. He was a Dick Grayson villain, not a Batman villain when he was first introduced. So having these 4 gangs and having them intrinsically tied to the city of Bloodhaven is definitely a way to try and give the city its own ecosystem that's very specific to it, and isn't anything to do with Gotham City. And yeah, and who doesn't like a good old fashioned gang war? Not Nightwing, I'll tell you that.
And just to mention for anybody listening or watching, the Teddies are these kids and adults who are wearing gigantic teddy bear heads. So very visually distinct villains, I think. Since we are talking about the villains, Faith, the villain of Ashes of the Academy is also kind of the hero in a certain way because it's in a very complex and interesting way. You're having the Fire Nation wrestling with their own history. That's really what I took away as the main theme of the book. Where did that come from, and why was that important?
Um, I can't remember exactly where it came from, but I definitely felt like once the show ended and Zuko, who is, the prince of the young prince of the Fire Nation, and his father was an abusive world conqueror, and then Zuko has to essentially step into his father's shoes, and lead this nation that has been waging war on the rest of the world for 100 years. So it made sense to me for Zuko's arc that he would really want to put forth reforms and try and shape this nation into a more peaceful future. So it made sense to start there in school, and in particular, the Royal Fire Academy for Girls is an environment that had been established in other parts of the Avatar universe. It was mentioned in the Kyoshi books. Kyoshi is a former Avatar, and there was I believe, two prose novels. I've read the first one, two prose novels about Kyoshi. And one of her companions went to the Royal Fire Academy. So it made sense for Zuko's arc, and then I thought it would be a lot of fun if there was bring May into it, because she's kind of an abrasive character on the show, or she always kind of comes off like she hates everyone, but she's also like really sweet to her little brother, and then she has this great relationship with her friend. Her friend Ty Lee on the show. So I thought it would be fun to sort of push forward May's humanity a little bit and put her in this teaching environment. But then the antagonist of the comic is another teacher at the Royal Fire Academy who is very committed to the way things are done, and her arc is trying to figure out if there is a better way to teach the children of this nation that has constantly been fighting this war of conquest and really genocide. I don't know, I guess some of it is just like my hopes for the future. I put a lot of myself into my work. I do feel like every comic that I produce is personal, so for me it's always like, what am I feeling at this particular time as I'm writing this script? Like where do I find my own personal hook? Where do I find my empathy for these characters? And it's 100% like what I hope for the future. I'm a big Star Trek nerd, and it's like I want that future for humanity. I want a future where everyone is fed and clothed, and we can travel the galaxy in starships, and humanity has evolved to the point where we are defined by our empathy and our goodness. So yeah, like this book in particular, it's like what does taking that first step towards a future that is kinder look like? And that for me was the emotional backbone of this particular graphic novel.
Stephanie, while we're talking about villains, I have a bunch of questions about them, but I don't know how much you want to say about the villains because part of it is a mystery of how it spans out over the series. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. What do you want to say about the bad guys in the books?
Okay. There's a classic Spidey villain that she is really dealing with in the first arc that I minor. I won't say who it is because there's part of a reveal. She doesn't know who she's fighting. She's basically being attacked by someone that she can't tell who it is because they've come to her. At some point, she's attacked by who she thinks is Spider-Man. At another point, she's attacked by herself. So it's, I don't know if that gives too much away, hopefully, but it was really cool to get to pull in for the first arc somebody, a villain that I really liked and wanted to write. And I thought it would be super fun also artistically to have a first arc where we have a villain that's so malleable that we can have all these different characters coming in and out. So visually really fun to give those scripts to artist Paolo Villanelli, who did such an amazing job with them. And also going to Paolo and being like, well, what other villains or things do you want to draw? So letting him kind of also dictate a little bit what he's like, you know, I've always wanted to draw, and I won't say what it is, but then getting to incorporate that into the story we're telling has been really cool. And the person that's kind of behind the main villain that's attacking Gwen, that kind of helps launch our second arc. So it's I like mysteries, if or maybe I like frustrating the reader, which which can be fun too.
Well, I think it does a good job thematically. And again, I'm going to try not to tip your head too much here. But since you have her being a stranger in a strange land in this book, she's out of her universe. She has to hide her identity. Having somebody that challenges that identity, I think, really doubles down on that theme.
Yes, that is, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of identity going on when you're kind of taken out of your home and put into a place where you're told, like, you have to make this your home. You can't tell the other spiders why you're here. So it's not only is it her struggling with her identity, but it's also her struggling with being really alone. And she has a moment really early on in that first issue. Something I wanted to do was really clarify the moniker of Ghost Spider. Like, what does the ghost part of her name mean? And now she's in a place where she doesn't exist. The previous Gwen Stacy, we know what happened to Gwen Stacy of Earth 616. She is no longer living. So now you have Gwen Stacy from another universe coming in and taking that Gwen's place. She's a ghost. She is literally a ghost living in another world where she doesn't belong. That's kind of haunting. So we play with that a lot, and kind of giving it, like, what is the mission of a ghost then? Like, somebody that not just doesn't belong, but really isn't real in this universe in a lot of senses. So yeah, I thought that was an important thing to do too. And then what does it mean to be a hero of ghosts? Like, who are the other ghosts that she can protect in this world?
Almost as good as villains is romance, and all three of your books have it in very different stages of relationships and very different levels of importance in terms of the overall plot. Dan, I'm going to go to you first just because Batgirl and Nightwing is, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, is one of the great comic book romances. I know some people would disagree and put him with other people, but what do you think works about these two characters together? Because in your book, they're in a very settled relationship. They're in a good place.
Yeah, I really didn't want to come in and just immediately start causing all sorts of drama between them because it's nice to have them in a stable place, and she's very much the sort of the voice in his ear throughout the run. You know, she's his sort of support system in both in life and in superheroing. Because we're using her mainly in the sort of oracle aspect of her identity, which is her where you know where she's the computer whiz of the whole Bat family and kind of the whole DC universe. Um, so she's supporting him a lot in that way, and also emotionally, which is what's kind of letting him take some big swings as Nightwing. He's not sort of caught up in drama. He has a supportive system around him. So he decides to try doing superheroing in a different way, which I don't think he would have the sort of confidence to do if he didn't have Babs at his back. But you know, having said that, I really enjoy writing the two of them, the interactions between the two of them, because she gives him absolutely no grace and calls him on absolutely all of his nonsense at all times.
Faith, you have the opposite trajectory for relationship because I think you touched on this earlier, but we have May as our main character, and Zuko shows up, and by this point they broke it up. They were left, if you watch the series, they're kind of together at the end. Here they're no longer together, and they're dealing with that in a very interesting and mature way. What was it like playing with that relationship or lack thereof?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I kind of like it when exes are friends after, not friends, like they're I don't think that May would consider Zuko her friend, but they are friendly. And I don't know, I enjoyed the maturity of that. They broke up, let's see, in one of Jean Yang and Guri Haru's comics previously. And then they kind of also dealt with that breakup also in Jean Yang and Guri Haru's another one of their comics called Smoke and Shadow. So I wanted to show the next stage of this relationship where they're essentially supporting each other in Zuko's quest to mold the Fire Nation, to give the Fire Nation a better, hopefully kinder, more peaceful future. I like May a lot. I think she's a great character. She's a lot of fun to write. And it was actually really fun to write her on her own, because throughout the course of the show, you usually see her beside either Ty Lee, who's like very funny and bubbly, so it's like the perfect, grumpy sunshine pairing, or you see her in relationship with Zuko. And this is May on her own, and she has this friendly relationship with Zuko where, they do have a common goal and they're working towards that common goal, but they're not together. They're partners in hopefully shaping the Fire Nation, but not romantic partners necessarily. And yeah, I enjoy writing those relationships that have like a messy history, but you still have characters interacting in a way that is, as you put it, more mature.
And Stephanie, I feel like I'm giving you nothing given all these mysteries that are going on, but Gwen does meet somebody at a coffee shop named Fabian. What could you tell us about him?
Yeah, I think she's initially like, this is not like I'm dealing with Spider-Man villains that are attacking me. I'm in a new Earth. I don't have time for this, but there's kind of a very classic meet cute that happens with them in a coffee shop, and he kind of keeps coming back. And it's enough to where she has told, as we're kind of building out her Earth 616 supporting cast, and she makes good friends with Jessica Jones. She has a good track history with people named Jessica, so I thought that was a good foil for her as well. And enough to where she's telling Jessica about her like potential feelings for this person and how it's distracting, and Jessica actually kind of encourages it and is like, actually, I think you should pursue this. You should look into this. Like, that's one step to becoming more familiar with the new Earth that you live in, the new situation that you are a part of. Maybe you should call this guy. And how they end up tangled together as the book progresses is, it is anything but meet cute territory.
It's very fun. I do want to bring up, you've mentioned their names a couple of times, but I want to make sure we talk about the artists on these books, because that is at least, if not more, 50% of the book. And you have some fantastic artists working with you all. Peter Wortman for Ashes of the Academy, Paola Villanelli, as you mentioned, for Spider-Gwen, and Dexter Soy for Nightwing. This is the most general question, but I'll just tee you up for it. But what's it like getting pages in for these books when you see it? What's it like working for them? Faith, let's go to you first.
It is so freaking cool. I love Peter's work. Like, we've been collaborating for quite a few years now, and he's amazing. Like, I was actually a fan of his. I read his comics before we started working together on Avatar. He did a web comic called Stonebreaker that is free to read online, so check that out. Yeah, he's amazing and awesome. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us the chance to talk about our artists, because I'm an artist and writer, and it's like artists are storytellers too. We're an integral part of making comics, and I think it's very important to emphasize that. So thank you so much. And yeah, hi Peter, you're amazing. Love working with you, bud.
Stephanie, what about you? What's it been like working with Paola Villanelli?
Yeah, I love Paolo. Yeah,
Paola.
we worked together on Black Widow and Hawkeye previously, and I thought it would be a really cool style to bring to a slightly more mature and darker take on Gwen and her universe, and it has paid off, I think. What Paolo brings to her story is, I think, really different than what we've seen before, and I like that. I like getting to give a Gwen story that's different and unique in its own way. And I really like adding in more horror elements as well, which Paolo is so good at. There's some I think we just revealed that Mr. Fear will be kind of making a bit of a comeback in a later arc, and the horror elements of like toxic gas and things like that Paolo does are just really, really incredible details. So and his costume designs that he's come up with for new characters, getting to recreate Black Tarantula, a new look for Mr. Fear, just really incredible stuff.
And Dan, what about you? You have Dexter Soy. What's it like working with him?
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, I don't know how much you'll appreciate me saying this, but I was reading Dexter's work in Gotham before I even became a comic book writer. When I was at college, I used to go to the comic book store and pick up Red Hood and the Outlaws. I loved his work on that. He was actually brought on to Nightwing before I was, um, because they kind of knew which direction they wanted to go in it, artistically, the editorial team. And I think he's like the perfect fit for taking the book in a slightly darker, slightly grimmer version of to a grimmer version of Bloodhaven. Um, but yeah, I mean, even just starting to work with Dex on the book, I looked at his work and what was his sort of clear influences and stuff, and we had a lot of crossover there. So even the direction the story's gone in is because Dex is drawing the book. I always want to have that kind of relationship with an artist where you're giving them stuff that they're excited to sit down at the desk every day.
Yeah. And we're going to have to wrap up in a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to come back to something we talked about a little earlier. Faith, you had mentioned it might be important to do a little bit of studying in terms of watching the show, or at least some parts of the show. You should watch the show. Avatar is great, but watch it before you read the book. Is there anything else you recommend people could study up, or should they just pick up this volume, enjoy, and kind of see what happens? Stephanie, what's your take? Any other Spider-Gwen things people need to read?
They don't have to at all. I think it's a really good jumping on point. That was part of the intention of it. Whether you've consumed any Spider-Gwen or none, I'm hoping it's a good entry point for readers.
Yeah, and I will mention, just pivoting off of that, and I'll do the same for each of you, but it is an ongoing series. Issue 8 just came out in stores, so if people pick up that volume and like it, there's a lot more Spider-Gwen to come. Dan, what about you? Can people just jump in with Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean the hope is if I've done my job right, then we'll send you in the other direction. You can start here, and then hopefully you'll want to go back and read the whole particularly rebirth run of Nightwing, and sort of the Grant Morrison's run on Batman and Robin, where Dick Grayson took that mantle on. Uh, Scott Snyder and Frank Villa and Jock's Batman Black Mirror. Those are the things that have sort of directly fed into this story, but they're stylistic influences, some plot threads. But this is our story. It's our jumping on point.
Yeah, and this volume will collect issues 119 through 124. Issue 121 is actually out on stands December 18th, so if anybody wants advance spoilers for the volume, or get it in the single issues and then pick it up and trade later. And Faith, what about you? Like I said, we already touched on this a little bit, but any required reading?
Definitely watch the show, and I would recommend also, if you would, for the introduction to Zuko's younger sister Kai, I would recommend picking up 2 of the Jean Yang and Guri Haru volumes, in particular The Search, which deals with the search for Zuko's mother, and the one that came after it, which I believe is The Rift. So yeah, I would recommend picking up those 2. I mean, they're great comics, so I don't feel like I don't feel like it's asking too much of readers. So yeah, recommend the show and those particular comics. None of the ones that I have written are necessary reading before you get into Ashes of the Academy, but I hope you'll check them out.
You got 6 more, so people absolutely should. And folks, that's all the time we have. I want to thank our speakers for this fantastic discussion, and thank you to all the librarians who joined us today. Thanks again to Faith, Dan, and Stephanie. I'll plug that you can check out my podcast and many others at comicbookclublive.com. But definitely pick up these books. They're all coming out next year, and I have read them, and I can guarantee they are awesome. That's an Alex Zalben guarantee. And whatever your fandom is, just remember, like we said at the beginning, if you enjoy something, you are a fan. There you go.